All right. So without further ado, thank you everybody for joining. Today's webinar is entitled Pro Tips to Designing the Security and Control Rooms of the Future. We're really excited. We had some phenomenal panelists here with us today. And this is definitely a unique panel in the sense that, we're not so much focusing on products or services or any specific solutions. The focus is really to understand where the market is going, what are the key decision-making processes to make sure that you're entertaining. And each panel has a very unique perspective from security integration, AV perspective, as well as the actual design. So just to give a brief bio, I'm personally Hanan from Primeview. I'm going to be moderating. And this is the first of many webinars we're going to be doing. And the control rooms is obviously a space where, whether it be security operations center, emergency operations center, network operations center, every space has its own need, and each one of these panelists have a unique perspective into how that can be done, how that can be designed. So just to give a quick bio on who we have here, and I hope it's okay, Michael, if I call you out and let you wave your hand so people know who's Michael. Michael is part of New York City-based Sentinel Consulting. He's the Director of Security Engineering. He is responsible for the design and expression of the diverse security technologies that serve as key elements for all Sentinel projects. And he's been at Sentinel just over 3 years, but in the industry over 10. And Michael, thank you for being here. Thank you. And Michael, just in case people want to reach you after, the best way to reach you, is it email? Is it LinkedIn? What's the best way to get you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's good. Cell phone or email also works.
Okay, great. Also on this panel, we have Frank Pena, CTO, Chief Technology Officer. Thank you, Frank. Of Command and Control Communication Engineering Logistics out of Tampa, Florida. Nice to see another Florida resident here. Mr. Pena, prior U.S. Army network engineer veteran with over 25 years experience supporting the DoD and other DoD cyber domains at the highest level. His expertise includes audiovisual, engineering, and integration. Other experience includes technical renovations, modernization of Strategic Leadership Operations Center at US CENTCOM, USCOM, and other NATO projects on a global level. Also here, my dear friend, Jim Kitchen. Give me a nice little wave there so people know who other person is dressed in white shirt and gray sports jacket. Jim is the National Account Director of JCI, Johnson Controls, going on 21 years, obviously including acquisitions and growth. Originally part of Security Services and Technologies known as SST, ADT, Tyco Integrated Security, now under the umbrella of JCI. Also has a really strong background in physical security managing as well, national accounts, and I've known him personally for years now as part of JCI. Thank you. Jim, if someone wants to reach you, best way is email, social media. What's the best way to get you?
I would say best way would be my cell phone, which I assume we'll give out, or if we haven't already, and LinkedIn as well is fine.
Awesome.
So I could share my cell as we go.
Awesome. And we also have Robert. Give us a quick wave. Robert Haddad is a seasoned security consultant with expertise in planning, design, and project management. Originally joining SMW back in 2005. Responsible for some really notable projects from Penn, Harvard, Princeton, UConn, UMass, Blackstone, Bloomberg, LaGuardia Airport, an array of projects for in the healthcare facilities as well. And really pleasure to have you. Thank you, Robert.
Glad to be here.
And if people want to reach you, what's the best way to get you? Is it email, social media?
LinkedIn is a great way. Also, you can reach out and contact us through our company website. Either way is a good way.
Awesome. Awesome. And last but not least, we have Mohammed Shehzad. Give a quick little wave for everybody. Thank you. Mohammed has been the Managing Director of Atriade Security Consulting for over 15 years, 30 plus years of experience in security. He provides unbiased product, independent client advocacy, and leverages long-standing presence and engagement in the industry to find the right solutions for his clients. He started as a design consultant, now provides consulting advice on technology, design, process, policies, governance, training, and operational support. He designed systems for multinational and local libraries, created programs for Fortune 50 companies and county governments, written policies for global retail operations and 100-person chemical plants. Thank you so much for joining us, Mohammed.
Thank you, Hanan. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, awesome. So the best way to reach you, Mohammed, in case anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
LinkedIn and email these days are the best, but company website has contact information and also our phone number, main phone line as well.
Okay, great. Excellent. So we have almost we have a sold out crowd and really happy to get started. So let's jump right into it. So one of the questions obviously come up as, when someone has an opportunity or thinking about a building and how they're going to use it is when designing a security command center, what are the real critical roles and responsibilities? I guess we'll let Robert from Shen Milson Wilke address that one first.
Great. Thanks for throwing that question my way. So, that's an important part of any design process, the critical roles and responsibilities. And, we can look at it from two pieces. There's really that operational side of it as far as who's going to use the control center, who's going to be in there, what they're going to be doing, and also the actual design side of it. Once those things have been determined, how are we actually going to build that part? We're all approaching this as kind of the technology experts and the security and AV experts, but within those control rooms is the MEP side of things as well. Are we going to have enough power and heating and cooling, and how are we going to get the right type of infrastructure within those facilities? So this, the two parts of that is identifying who needs to sit at that table and who those decision makers are going to be. I think we've all been involved in projects where it's come down, to the design process, and we realize the right person may not be at the table, the ones that are going to be using that from a day-to-day basis. We need to understand, again, from that operational side of it, who's actually going to be stationed there and what they're going to be doing with it to make sure that any design criteria that's developed and put forth is going to meet their needs.
Excellent response there, Robert. Thank you so much. And to address the same question, Mohammed, please.
Yeah, I'll kind of, expand upon what Robert said very accurately, that you have to identify the stakeholders that are both on the project side and on the end user side. And in terms of determining roles and responsibilities, it's really critical to understand how the organization operates. You don't want to design a space for them that they are not going to be able to use effectively. So how do they use their personnel in that space? What are some of the normal day-to-day function roles that they have and what their responsibilities are? What are some of their more strategic and long-term roles? So operators versus monitoring agents, analysts, supervisors versus managers, are they all in that same space? How do they interact within that space? How they interact with each other? Identifying and defining those roles becomes very, very important upfront, documenting them and understanding their function. And then to the design side, understand in the beginning who are all the key players that are going to be needed, from architect all the way down to which installers, who is going to do what. In a lot of organizations, you may have internal AV or institution that's going to just handle things by themselves. They may rely on the security consultant to design a bulk of it, or they may have the architect provide the exact space that's needed, or the architect may rely on the security consultant to recommend concepts. These are all details that become very critical in the beginning, because if you're walking under the assumption that the architect is going to do something and you're going to provide something else, that could be disconnect. So those roles on the design side are also critical. And this is the project governance, I will say that should be established up front.
So very thorough. Thank you, Mohammed. Excellent response there as well. I think, the needs of control rooms are obviously constantly changing. And one of the common questions we always hear is that, in a control room, how do I gather? How do I save? How do I share information, such as sometimes simple things like access control, VMS, a video management system, right? We have guys on this call like Jason Peak that, do some things like Genetech and integrating those things with cable TV and a web browser applications. So how do we tie that all together in a real world, and on applications such as maybe LED walls or like the LCD wall canvas I have behind me? I guess maybe Frank, maybe you could address that from C3EL from an integrator perspective, please.
Yes, so expanding on what Robert and Mohammed stated on question one, once you understand the customer and the use of that data wall, then you have to find a way to make sure all that data or content will be available in a matrix switch or a central point where you can control it and manage it to be able to display it on the LED. It could be a matrix switch, it will be a wall processor, or sometimes it will be a web portal that you're sending that wall data to. Like I say, you really have to understand the customer and all the stakeholders to make sure you meet all their expectations and you deliver the project as a project that meets their requirement.
Excellent. And Frank, thanks so much for your response there. And from a security integrator's perspective, Jim Kitchen, I would love to hear your perspective. You've had quite a number of experiences there too.
Adding on, thanks, Hanan, to what Frank had said, and working in conjunction with you, Hanan, as well as the consultants on this team. In this digital age, the security control room should really be your blueprint for your future of smart and sustainable buildings, as well as protecting your employees. I'd like to share some key ideas to keep in mind. Gathering the relevant information timely during and after critical incidents. How do I gather this information? What format do I send this in? The security control room is really your gateway of information when it comes to gathering access, control incidents, video footage, mass notifications, executive travel, and weather apps. I do believe the typical setup includes gathering streams of information, pulling information from different streams and putting it together in a massive email with multiple attachments. Did I include the correct files? Will this exceed the email limitations of my email or others? What if you were able to gather multiple applications and data from various sources, pull it all together in one efficient dashboard? I truly believe now is the time in our digital age to create this dashboard through different technologies I refer to as open blue technologies with the use of the correct Primeview video walls. This is done through the right connectors, with use of the sensors in your buildings and workplace, and in some cases, your identities. I look forward to sharing more of this information and answering questions on this topic throughout. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. I think you nailed it. It's and Frank as well, is that putting together these systems, designing these systems are so critical. And as one of the attendees alluded to, David Goetz, it's really understanding at a rapid pace, which steps do you take, how you integrate these things, how you design these things, and what canvas to use, because you have to figure out how to support the client's needs today as well as in the future. And we're going to address that a little bit further in the panel. And thank you for one of the attendees, David Goetz, for engaging us in that. We're going to go just right into that in just a second. So just moving right along there, when designing a security command center, how do we establish the size of the monitor wall for environment? How do we calculate even the overall space? What's the best location? Is it satellite? Is it operational hub? I've done my share of projects with Michael from Sentinel. I'd love to hear your feedback on that, your thoughts.
Yeah, so, there's numerous factors you want to take into account when you're designing the monitor wall. A lot of it comes out of your design criteria that Rob and Mohammed spoke of earlier. And, a lot of it's also based on the type of operation you're running. So we like to take a source and event approach. So we like to look at what is your static view and what's your highest probability of events, and then determine what type of sources we can put in to give you a better picture and a better situational awareness for all your operators, right? So that includes camera views, right? Grouping some camera views together, but also, other event data, facility maps, local news, or, even national news, dashboards, building management, that type of stuff, to really give, that really good picture to, to help increase your time to resolution. Once you have all this information, then you can kind of determine how much square foot you need for each piece, and that's how, we typically size it. As far as the location, obviously this is, one of the most critical pieces of your facility. So you want to pick something that's really naturally secure, right? The more naturally secure, the less you have to provide extra protective elements. And, this is really going to vary based on the type of operation. But, two areas we always, want to avoid is the lobby and any adjacent spaces to loading docks.
So excellent response there, Michael. It's funny, on a project that you and I are in the midst of right now with, Sentinel being the hub of the design and an integrator, physically being on site at that airport location, it all, moves so fast sometimes that even from the design perspective, even before it gets integrated, things change. I mean, we've seen this ourselves in recent weeks.
They've made their mind, they've changed their mind a lot. So
yeah, that's why it's so important to also work on coordination between the design entity such as Sentinel, right? And the other consultants you have here, and then the integration arm of, let's say, C3EL and Johnson Controls. And even as a manufacturer, we all have responsibilities that on the fly or ad hoc, we have to say, I know this is what was designed. You, Mr. Integrator, think there's something different. End user thinks there's something different. So we all have to adapt and say, wait, this is what's budgeted, but we may have to change this to get the desired result because now the height of the ceilings are different, et cetera. So, I mean, these things change in real time, and we all need to be flexible, not just from a designer perspective, from an integrator, but also a manufacturer perspective in real time. I mean, we see it every day together, Michael, you know?
All the time, every time, yeah. Every time.
Thank you, Michael, for your response. Mohammed, same question to you.
Mute.
Sorry, Mohammed, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I just saw it. So, Michael, you'll find this amusing because you just mentioned the 3 no's for the location. So I was at a university once, and their command center was a glass space in the main lobby of their main administration building. So I got a kick out of that.
Perfect placement.
Exactly. But you know, the culture of the organization and the culture of the security department as to how it conducts its incident command and incident response is critical. Is it a linear organization that's going to dictate top down and report and escalate bottom up? Or is it a more collaborative organization that's going to communicate with each other on different levels? Are the analysts and the monitoring agents talking to each other? Are the supervisors communicating and understanding what's happening in the room? Is a manager in the physical space, or are they outside? How engaged are they with the entire group? Those are really very important elements on top of the you know, the roles and responsibilities to consider when you design that space. So if the organization is collaborative, you want huddle spaces. You want to give them the opportunity where they can collaborate, so they're not shouting at each other from various parts of the room. If they're a collaborative organization, you do not want to design a linear room where everybody's facing the wall. You want to design a circular space, a different type of a space where they can maintain eye contact. And if they're a linear organization, then it's a different type of design. So understanding how the culture of the corporation or the institution or university and the culture of that security organization works and what's effective is very, very important in terms of designing the room, designing the size. What happens when there's an incident? Do they assemble everyone from HR and risk and business continuity into a single space, or do they do it from their own individual location? So do you need conference space, for example? And then that dovetails into AV requirements and video sharing. The last thing I will mention on the location is that also depends somewhat, you know, Michael hit it on the nail as to the resiliency of the location. Language is very important in multinational corporations. So when you're designing a command center and you're going to put it in the United States, but you know, half of your portfolio is in Asia, you're going to run into a problem. So you want to then create a regional model of small security centers that can communicate effectively with the people who are calling. That is the essence and the purpose of these spaces, is to communicate with people who need assistance. So that kind of should factor into it as well, as to whether I'm going to put one big SOC in one place or I'm going to regionalize this based on my customer base.
So phenomenal response there, Mohammed. Very thorough. I think, you know, we have with us on the attendee side here today some unique corporations that are the financials, you know, that Jim and I talk to all the time. And some of these financial, you know, they may need to go multi-continent, multi-global. And, you know, how you tie in these systems, like people often overlook, like, okay, even something simple, like, okay, I have a location in Arkansas and I want that to tie into New York, New Jersey, and LA. I mean, these are everyday problems that not just as a consultant, we need to think about, not just as an integrator, but as a manufacturer. Don't think about just that one room, as you said, how it all comes together.
Well, and I'll just, one last thing I'll add to that. It's not just even that your employees may speak English, but if you have to call the local police department in Tokyo, you're not going to be able to communicate. So it's not just your internal atmosphere.
Absolutely. All languages, all lives matter. Everybody, you know, for lack of a better term as well.
Yeah, I mean, that ties back to the first question we talked about. The roles and responsibilities is making sure, to that point, it's not just this room in this physical location in front of us that we're designing. It's all those different places that it touches. So, Mohammed, to your point, you know, what other countries or locations or languages do we have to speak and interact with? So this is going to operate the way it should. So that's all important stuff.
Precisely. And you know this all too well, is that, especially when it comes, let's say, to a firm, let's say like SMW, where you have your AV division, you have your security division, and you need to make sure even within those divisions, everyone's talking to each other, because even within a single AV consultant or security consultant firm, because you're multiple disciplines, and multiple contents, you have to channel all that information together. It's not always so easy.
You do, and again, having a team that specializes in design is incredibly helpful, as we do, because it's not just the one discipline. It's not just security or IT or AV or any one of those things. All of that has to be integrated. So, for those that don't have the ability to do that design in-house or that coordination in-house, again, back to the roles and responsibilities, making sure we bring those right people to the table, because at some point that AV system is going to be turned over to the IT integrator system, for integration with that, or the access control system, the security integrator is going to turn that over to the AV integrator to make sure it's displayed properly. So there's a lot of different parts and pieces that are touching this, and a lot of specialized knowledge that has to be put into play there.
Yeah, you nailed it. And I think, that leads perfectly a segue into our next question, which is security. So what does that mean? So with video over IP becoming more cost effective and reliable today, there's no question about it. How do we ensure we are implementing a secured solution? Frank, I think you're working in multiple continents, not just in your own backyard in Tampa. So I'll let you answer that one first.
Well, yes, we've been talking about, having a video over IP more available nowadays. That brings another problem. There's cyber attacks, or every device is available to everyone, so people can easily get default usernames and passwords. So the first thing I will do is, whenever you get a device, first, if in our DoD environment, I will make sure the device comes from a trusted source, right? So you trust the manufacturer. They're not going to put any kind of Trojan in there, or robots, bots there that will affect or deploy later on in the system. Then I will, once you implement the system, I will deploy a role-based access control, just like you're doing when you access control the building. You want to do that on your network as well. Not everybody should have access to every particular device or every function of that device.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Security is key, and especially in a world where there's so many different streams coming in there, right? And how it's tied into multiple systems. It's critical. What level of security is there? What level of security also do the employees have that are servicing these things? I mean, these are all really valid concerns. So I'll let the same question on the IP side. Robert, you guys work in multiple continents as well for design and how these things come together. So same question for you.
Yeah, to Frank's point, those are some of the things that take place when we're doing the actual install and integration is happening, but before that, it's really how are those policies and procedures that the organization may have, how are those going to be implemented into the design? You're really not going to approach this design with coming up with your own sort of policies and procedures that this is how this will be taken care of, this is how this will be locked down or secured. It's having that end user policy and procedure put into place, so we understand how that organization protects their information, what sort of safeguards are they going to require, and then building those into the specification documents, so that integrator, when they do install, they're following that checklist of items they have to put in place to make sure that follows. All the integrators from all the equipment providers, are they taking the proper safeguards, putting those in place to make sure their systems are locked down and secured per those policies. IP is everywhere. Everything we do is IP. We're seeing it more and more in the market now with IP video and storage in the cloud and systems in the cloud, the administration, the storage of all that. There's still a lot of apprehension to doing that. There's still a lot of organizations and people that haven't fully embraced it, because they may feel that it's not safe and secure yet. But you can see it just pervasive in our own daily lives, that everything we do from our personal life is in that IP realm. So that's making its way into the commercial sector. It's really, there's a cost factor involved in that. Where are we going to store this video? How much is that going to cost? I mean, all of those things come into play when we're talking about that security level and how we're going to do it. As we talked about in the previous question about, things, dealing with control rooms that may not be in our geographical location in other parts of the world, where is that central repository of information going to be? And how do we make sure that it's safe from end to end? because then you're dealing with it going into the outside world and into the wild per se, and making sure that it gets transmitted and stored correctly. So, having those, again, identifying the roles and responsibilities up front to make sure we have the end users, professionals, and policymakers involved in this, that's going to ensure the design is safe and secure as well.
Yeah, Robert nailed it. I mean, I've seen video walls that have from a few hundred, from 10 IP sources to 100 IP sources to 7,000 IP sources. Unfortunately, Mohammed, that one's in the Middle East, and it needs 7,000 cameras, for better or worse. And I'm sure you could guess which one I'm referring to. But that's the reality we live in. And we had a question from Mark Jensen in the crowd. Is the picture I have in my background, is that virtual? Is that real? The answer is that's real. And that's just a shopping center. That's not even a multi-government UN building or anything like that. It's not a DoD project. More and more video is becoming a part of it, and making sure that IP source is secure, as Robert alluded to, and Frank, it's critical. So thank you, Robert. Moving along, next question that we had is how to best align intelligence versus monitoring functions in a SOC, right? How do you create that right level of collaboration? Frank, I'll let you address that one.
Yes, so I see those as two different roles, right? So you have people that need to monitor all the system, making sure they stay healthy. And the other one is the people that actually gather that information and use it, of what you're displaying on that data wall for them. So the key thing that we do at C3EL is that early on, we get involved with the customer and we try to understand what they're going to use or do at that operations center, so we can filter, the information and make sure that we give them the information that has value and that they can use to complete their mission. There's so much information out there that nowadays not everything needs to be displayed on the wall.
Not everything needs to be, that's for sure. Thank you, Frank, for your response. Mohammed, would love to hear your thoughts. Same question.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one in the sense that there is an operational piece to it, and as Frank mentioned, that not everything needs to be on the wall, right? So how do these two functions operate? They're different philosophies. Some end users are going to have them completely separate. We've had that, and then some of them are in the same room and they're communicating, together. So obviously, you want to understand how the organization assesses its risk, and how does it evaluate proactive versus what the reactive functions are. And I would also say in that to the audience is that there's a lot of benchmark data around that, right? There's a lot of best practices. So if you're planning on venturing in this direction, this is an important area to design upfront and to talk through upfront. And so to understand and kind of ask for what are different organizations doing, what are the different pros and cons, what are the risks of collaborating versus not collaborating versus sharing data versus not sharing data becomes very important. Once you've had that discussion, and once you have determined that, I think collaboration in a command center environment is just absolutely critical. Now, you may not need to display that travel data on the video wall because that analyst is performing certain distinctive function that they need to do so they can have their own space. They can communicate with the people they need to communicate with. But if there is an incident that escalates, the ability to do it very quickly and efficiently is extremely important. So having the right conversation around that, at the end, you may decide that a huddle space is not an answer, or sharing a video wall is not an answer. Those are all right answers depending on your organization's culture. But having that conversation in the context of risk, what is it that I want to proactively look after and look for versus what is it that I want to engage in terms of an incident response, and how do I want to combine the two functions together? And then the solution can come from whichever direction it comes. But having that upfront discussion is super, super important.
Thank you, Mohammed. I think it's the generic term of collaboration and homogeneous systems. I mean, all these things that people use, it's so vague until you actually get into the design, as you said, and talk to the stakeholders.
Yeah. And some organizations are going to be fine. We had a client that did not want the analyst together in the room as the monitoring. They're completely separate rooms, and they were okay with it. They were across in the same space, but they were two separate spaces. That's how they worked. It was effective for them. We had one other client that had a circular design of a command center, and everybody was in the room talking, sitting together. We had a hoteling space designed for them so they could step away from all the noise and focus on what the task was at hand. It's how it works for you and your environment.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, we have this all the time. And, I was talking this actually the other day with one of Michael Amaro from Sentinel's customers, is that when you're designing these control rooms, do you really want everyone in that room to have the authority and the ability to change what's on the wall? No way. You want, one or two people at best that have the capability. Someone that has more than just, a badge and a gun in their pocket. It goes a little bit beyond that.
Yeah. I mean, setting priorities and access to certain things is definitely critical, and it's something that's usually overlooked, right? Like you just, you feel like, because of the idea behind the monitor wall is you can blow stuff up and move things from here to there, right? I want everybody to be able to do that, but realistically, that's not what you want, right? Because you'll probably end up with like the basketball game or something up on the screen is what you'll end up with, but we want to try to avoid that.
Yeah, hopefully it's not going to be watching LeBron James. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. Definitely, if you have to watch the New York Knicks, it's just painful. But that's a separate story. We'll get into later, hopefully.
Oh man, that's awful. Awful.
Sorry, I had to give a shout out to those New York crowd here. But again, nothing against Mark Warren or any of the guys in Houston that are on this, because I feel bad. You lost Harden, but the reality is the reality is. So just moving right along. Next question that we see this all the time. I see large monitors available on the market from Best Buy that are just a few $100s. Why can't I integrate those into control room design? We've all gotten those questions. And I think no one got that question probably more than Jim Kitchen. So I'll let you answer that one.
And you're spot on and addressing some of the questions online here. Is that a real video wall behind you? And being in your command center, or actually your store in New York City, I know it's a real video wall. And as far as being on the integration side, going from a customer before that, a project manager, salesperson, the director, all the questions are always the same. Do you really want to be working with your customer, a customer like, especially the financial folks that are on this call? It typically only takes one online purchase or a retail purchase to experience, either during implementation or the most first equipment failure, to realize the importance of aligning yourself with the right company and the right product. You don't want to risk something as important as your video wall during the design and the implementation stage of the security control room. It needs to work as designed during the installation, especially day 2 support on a failure. So that is when you're reminded of how important the right support with the right company, such as Primeview Global. I would highly recommend going in this direction. It typically only takes one purchase of online and retail. It's just something you don't want to do.
Yeah, Jim, you raised a good point. I mean, I remember visiting with your team, to a very well-known, real estate developer in New York City. And they asked us point blank, why do I need a commercial display? Why do I need a video wall processor? And just when you finally get down the road and convince them you need a commercial solution because it's a commercial environment, then they say, wait, why can't I just connect my desktop to the video wall and run it that way? And it's comical because they want a functionality that doesn't exist through the desktop. And then you have to convince them. I mean, we have guys that are attendees that are with us here. They all struggle with this, it's, as an integrator, it doesn't matter if you're based in Pennsylvania or Kansas, or if you're a consultant, we all struggle with this, is explaining to end users that you can't get the functionality you need if you don't budget for the right technology. You won't get the desired outcome. It's that simple. And it's a struggle.
On that note, the recommendation on those that are designing a command center, whether it's in a small data center or if it's in an international global site or something where it has 7,000 IPs, taking a visit and seeing it live, giving Hanan a chance to show the various types of video walls will actually be an eye-opening experience. I highly recommend doing it as you design your control room in the future.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. So the same question about some of these Best Buy options that people like to throw out for a few $100. Michael, I mean, you get this from a consultant side all the time. Why can't I just do this? Why do I need a commercial solution?
Yeah, I mean, cost is always, something that comes into play when you're doing these designs, right? Where can we get costs? And, Jim kind of touched on it. Really, the monitors you can buy at Best Buy aren't set for the right duty cycle, for what you need in a command center, right? We're talking 24/7 operations, uptime is critical. And a typical monitor at a Best Buy is rated for like 8 to 16 hours max, right? And the MTBF for that is, nowhere near what you're going to get from a control room operation. So once you couple the downtime you may face to the amount of times you're going to replace the Best Buy monitor to the control room monitor, it's going to more than exceed the cost, right? So that's one of the biggest things that we always kind of push when we're talking about why we're choosing a specific product. The other thing is the aesthetics, right? So the nice thing about having the media wall, we kind of touched on it, right? You can blow things up and you have this nice thin bezel, less than 3 millimeters or 1.8 millimeters, what have you. Where your standard monitor is 20 millimeters. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're trying to expand something across 4 screens, it kind of, when you're spending this much money, you want it to really look nice, right? So it's just another thing that we always try to push when we're talking about why we're going with this type of equipment.
No doubt, Michael, no doubt.
Yeah, so this question is an important one. That really shows why you need to have a really tight integrated design team, because everybody has different levels of expertise in different things. There's control rooms and then there's control rooms, right? These large scale video walls and things like that. You want to make sure that your design team has that AV expertise. You want to make sure they have the IT expertise to connect it all. You want to make sure they have the security expertise to understand how all these systems operate and how they function. All of that has to come together. And to that Best Buy question, you may find somebody that is, not to knock anybody, but you may find somebody that doesn't know enough, Mike, to your point, to point out, listen, it's not rated for the same duty cycle as a commercial monitor. And yeah, on paper, it meets the spec because it has the same resolution. Yeah, it'll work fine. That's why having that right design team is critical to this. And that's why this is so important. You want to make sure that they can bring the right people to bear on that particular design issue when it's raised.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I saw just literally last week, we got brought in 25th hour, and it really nails this idea home. And a local mom and pop integrator, you're not a national player, not a national consulting firm, got involved, did a little 2x2 with what they call not 24/7 and not consumer, but it's called an all-day monitor. It's a new category now, all day. It's 16/7, not 24/7. But the boards that are inside these displays are not 24/7, right? And putting that issue aside, they also don't have what's called, like Michael alluded to, Michael Amaro, which is what's known as a video wall board. So they engaged Primeview, and it's pretty funny. They said, we want a video wall processor to get the functionality of a control room. I'm like, okay, it's good. Now you're thinking day 2 about functionality. Okay, put that issue aside. We can give you a video wall processor, and this is what it costs. And they said to me, whoa, we weren't expecting that. I said, well, the alternative is, and you're going to laugh when I say this, and this just happened last week, we can replace the video wall with a true commercial display, and then I could give you a more cost-effective processor. They're like, I don't get it. I said, well, those displays can't handle video wall mode unless you have a ton of outputs on your processor. And this happens all the time. People think about it and they're like, wait, so if I bought a commercial display from the beginning, I could spend less money on a processor? And the answer is yes. And people just don't think about that. So, it's the way people are utilizing these spaces. And this is just to address a question that came up recently from David Jones, from one of the attendees, is, yes, a lot of the work can be done oftentimes on a workstation level, on a desktop level. But in the modern control room, having the video wall portion in the back is important too, because it's not just about being reactive in a control room, right? It's about being proactive and having alarms and systems in place. That way things are automated to a certain extent. So David, we'll address that actually towards the end in just a second. So just bear with us, and I'll give everyone on the panel an opportunity to address that. So let's talk for a quick second about ergonomics, right? From ergonomic standpoint, what should be considered as we're proposing or in the process of these designs? And I'll let Robert from Shen Milson Wilke address that first.
So ergonomics are critical, both from the user perspective and the physical perspective. We've talked a lot about, in the questions we've answered so far, about how to design a space and what should go into it and how it should look. but we know more often than not, the end user and even ourselves as designers and integrator, we're given a space and say, put my control room here. Rarely, not rarely, but most oftentimes we don't get to design the space from the ground up. We're given a box to work with. So those ergonomics become even more critical at that point, because we have to cram all this functionality into a space that, one, we know is too small, it's too long, it's too narrow, the ceilings aren't high enough, we can't put raised floor in. How are we going to make this work when we have these large scale control rooms? So the ergonomics become even more important. We're going to have sit stand desks, but if they stand up, they're blocking the people behind us. All those things need to come into play when we're figuring out how to use that space and what we're going to do with it. Not just all the systems that are going to be displayed and used there, but how the people physically going to move and interact within that space. There could be columns in that space. How do we work around those things? Again, goes back to the ergonomics of the functionality and how they're going to use it. And we also know that, to the point of getting things, on the desktop display and up on the video wall, we know that these aren't just security control rooms anymore. They're taking all the information, and that's, your control room is really your 24/7 hub. So not only are we monitoring security functions, we're monitoring BMS systems, we're monitoring other ancillary building functions, because there's nobody after hours to do that. So having that stuff be in a position on a wall in a room that's too narrow for everyone to see is incredibly important. So laying that out and understanding how the physical space is going to work is incredibly important.
Thanks, Rob. You nailed it. We had a question that came up from Catherine Rupp about the ergonomics, and you addressed that, as well as one of your colleagues, Steve Emsack, because you talk about the cost of real estate and desktop versus large wall. How do you collaborate? You addressed all those. So thank you, Robert. Same question about ergonomics. Mohammed, please.
Yeah. So I want to add to ergonomics a little bit of health and wellness. Of all the major assessments that we have done on command center environments, the number one complaint that we got from the people that were in that room was not about the alarm data coming in or about the processors or how to share video. It was chairs. My chair is uncomfortable. We're expecting people to sit in these rooms for 8 to 12 hour shifts. And they are in a space that may not have comfortable seating. They're in a space, one client had carpets installed because that's what everybody did. The carpets had gotten so dirty over the years that everybody that was in that room had some sort of allergy issue to deal with. They tried to shampoo it. It made it worse because there's no ventilation. There's one level of lighting or two levels of dimmable lighting. There is no proper temperature control. One of the command centers we went in, it was one setting. They were all freezing the whole time. So when you assign responsibility to people who are going to be monitoring incidents, critical alarms, events, reacting effectively in crisis situations, we cannot start with uncomfortable chairs, bad carpets, and freezing temperatures. And I know I'm kind of making light of it in a sense, but it's important because those are small details that get overlooked. So one of our standard recommendations is fix the chairs. How old are the chairs? And then just get rid of them. And we actually found, in terms of carpets, we don't use carpets in our designs. We use a rubber composite. We were having this conversation with an architect, and that's where really this engagement is really, really crucial. And they were going to put carpets in, and we said, well, carpets have these types of issues, and this is what happens in a 24/7 environment. And they were like, that's interesting. Nobody's ever said that. How about we look at some other solution? And they actually came up with a rubber composite solution that we have now since then used. We have actually taken that to architects on our own and say, no, we want to use this solution. Much better, much easier to clean, doesn't collect dust, all those things. There's a client that wanted different lighting. They said the lighting was too bright, even at the dimmest level. So we had blue lights for them in their space. And they don't ever turn on. We gave them the different options. They don't ever turn regular lighting on. Their command center has just blue lights 24/7, and they love it. And those types of ergonomic details are really important. And, you've heard a theme of me saying linear versus nonlinear design. Imagine the ergonomics of now you're having to communicate by constantly craning your neck backwards and sideways and doing that for 8 to 12 hours in a day, trying to communicate with people that you cannot visually see. So I think those little details are really, really important in the design as to how you create that space and how the health and wellness of the employees that are there for long, long periods of time gets affected.
Yeah, I mean, those are very important things that you address, because we actually had a question from Demerel Lewis, actually one of Michael's colleagues, as well as Sivan Weissman, because we see it all too often that lighting and space management within the SOC, it affects the space, it affects the users. Like, even in my home office, I like to sometimes have the lights off, not because I'm gothic, just because it's easier to work, and it's such a critical thing. I mean, I remember seeing on some of our partners that we're working with, for petrochem and utilities, that, to address something that someone mentioned earlier about a desktop, versus having the wall, if you make the desktop functional and you make the sit to stand functional, where it's not just nice white lights around the sit to stand desk, but there's actually an alarm trigger where it turns red, and there's an event driven situation, and then you have to look at and see visualization on the wall, it all comes into play with the lighting, as you alluded to, Mohammed. So thank you. So just moving along there, we had an interesting question that comes up very often about power, the connectivity of sources, redundancy measures should be in place. And unfortunately, I saw this for myself in a recent control room in New York, where we specified redundancy of all these things. We specified power. And then when a third of the wall goes out, it's not coming back on like normal, they couldn't figure out. And they're like, well, you have a generator tests. You have UPC power replacement on everything but this third wall. So let's talk about that for a second. I mean, Jim, I'm sure you've seen this as well.
You really nailed it on that question, Hanan. So appreciate you directing that towards me. During the design of a security control room, you want to be assured you have backup power, much like a UL central station. You can't not think about your control room that way. You can't afford your video wall, as you just mentioned, Hanan, your server-based applications such as access control, video, travel portals, to name a few, to go down for any period of time, especially during a crisis. And look what's happening today during this inclement weather that's taken the state of Texas out. You need something. And I'm sure many of you, as you mentioned as well, customers, end users, you do your power outage generator tests on the weekends. And you often have technicians on standby because of how important that is. You can't afford these critical systems to go down and not come up timely. This is a critical element for your security control room design. Clean power, UPS, generator design to keep your power up as close to 100% as possible. So it's a critical design element. You nailed it with that question.
Thank you, Jim. And yeah, redundancy, I can't, tell people enough about that. I mean, even beyond the displays, beyond the processing, I mean, even now that LED walls and seamless walls are becoming so popular, we recently, changed the way we make our LED, because we realized in command and control settings, having redundancy on power and receiving on the actual LED walls, not in a rack somewhere, but redundancy on the LED built in is something, that's important. So we developed this, I want to say started a year ago, and now we're launching it at the end of Q1. We realized that redundancy on just every component is such a critical mass, because if you're a utility company, if you're a healthcare facility, or if you're even Charlie Howell in Dallas, Texas, and you experience this crazy weather this week, and you have 100+ car pileup, and you're the transit authority dealing with this, you're like, never in a million years would you think that redundancy matters. But when it actually matters right there in front of you, it makes a difference. It's the desktop in front of the operator and the reference wall. All of a sudden, and these third tier monitors that Charlie alluded to in a question from the crowd, these things come up. And until you had that bad weather, it was like, oh, what do I need it for? Right? Why is that so important? And we're learning the hard way, guys, in many places in the country.
To me, it's commonplace, Hanan. And from a consultant perspective, does this ever not get covered? I know there's a lot of people listening here, but is that something that's a misstep on a control center design, for Mohammed or Rob, Michael?
It's not, but it can be. I mean, it depends, right? It depends on how you have this conversation. What have they planned for? That's why the engagement, that very first question, roles and responsibilities, Michael mentioned this, or Frank, Robert probably mentioned this, you're an MEP engineer. What is the building? What is the end user's plan on emergency power? Those things If you don't discuss those roles up front and incorporate them into the team, it will get missed. So, I mean, that's at least from my experience. Yes, it can get missed unless you're really proactive. A lot of responsibility falls on the security consultant to kind of make sure that those things are being addressed, and you have to do it repeatedly. And once everybody's agreed on it and put it in a design, you still have to do it.
It's the dreaded value engineering term, right? When they start talking about we got
that's
value
the key,
engineer
right?
stuff, and we only need time for a couple hours or something. So yeah.
Remember, if it's missed, it's the consultant's fault, right? That's the key. That's a joke.
Yeah, I mean, it's typically a cost thing, right? So, like Robert said, value engineering, right? Like it's, when we're talking about specifying, redundancy, we're looking at a generator, obviously, but then we like to, have a UPS that runs the whole center, right? So once you start, getting into a UPS that size, the cost keeps going up and up and up. And then, it's like, oh, well, where can we cut? That's something that, people might look to cut, but it's absolutely critical, right? Like having the UPS size to at least cover your generator time is going to keep you from losing your monitors, right? We even go to an extent of, maybe we have a UPS size to evacuate an entire building, right? So, once you get into that point, some of the stuff could get cut based on the cost. Outside of that, and I'll just kind of jump in here with the redundancy stuff. We always look to have redundant pathways for your network connectivity, right? So both inside and outside, and we're looking for, physically separate pathways, right? That way, if one goes down, you have the backup, and then you have, you could potentially use cellular or some other, a separate vendor for your outside world connectivity. Actually, the client we were talking about earlier, the airport client, when the incident happened in Nashville recently, they lost all their internet connectivity because they only had a single vendor providing the internet connectivity for them. So, it's just something to kind of think about.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it, Michael, because we had a comment that came in from Charlie Howell, again from Texas, and he raised a good point. Is that, and Michael, you address this, right away, is that oftentimes they're like, oh, we don't have the budget for all this redundancy. Well, you found a way to get that $60,000 Kalikata marble conference room table. So maybe we could get a little creative to make sure your control room actually works, to make sure your pharmaceutical drugs from every pharmaceutical company is being monitored from step A to step B, and you have $30 million in a 40-foot container moving at a time, and every vaccine is moving, and you're monitoring these things. These are real issues that have to be taken. And if you have a real security network architecture, redundancy is just equally as important. So the process is never ending. It doesn't start, it doesn't stop. You have to continue to evolve. And one of Jim's friends, Christine, alluded to this is, you need to understand, yes, there's always limitations, all right, and sometimes a network outage is a network outage, but you got to have local connectivity, and you got to make sure that has redundancy. There has to be levels of redundancy, because let's be honest, the end users at a major financial institution, right, Jim, they don't care how it works. They just care to have it working.
Yes.
They don't care.
Make it work, not go down. Sure.
It's effective to be able to communicate that if you are able to do that in the context of risk, right? Okay, so these are the documented risks that you are going to experience if you're not going to go down. If there's a value engineering exercise, there is something like that. What are the operational risks that the organization can face? And then what is the ownership of that risk? Are you able to accept that risk? If it's not the security, if it's the real estate team pushing it, or if it's the budget or the financial suite pushing it, understanding risk. Okay, yes, we're not paying for this redundancy in year 1 and 2, but we understand that if it goes down, if there's a snowstorm in Texas, we're not going to have our command center, and that's an acceptable risk to us. And as long as that's understood up front, and usually when you start having that conversation, things do tend to change. Not always, but that's an important part. There was one question about lighting, and I wanted to come back to it. I think that it's well worth the effort. We understand the importance of it. And I think that if you're working on a project, engage the lighting consultant. Those resources are available to you as a full project team. So if you're a security director, or if you're a real estate professional, engage that lighting consultant for a little bit of money for that space, and ask them to focus on that space separately, and not treat it as a general office space, not treat it as a data center space. and engage them for just an evaluation on and recommendation, and then then a security consultant can take it from there. But that best in class expertise, going back to those roles above, is really, really helpful, and spend that 2 days worth of consulting effort on them to get their input and feedback as to how it will work, because they're going to know nuances that we in the security industry might not, how the sunlight comes into that space, or how that space is designed close to something else, or what other sources are available. Blue light being example, that's how you find out about these creative solutions that you can use effectively.
So just to answer, there's 2 quick open questions I wanted to address. Christine, thank you for the question about security network architecture. So Jim and I, we've discussed this in the past, is that when you design a system, and something we alluded to earlier in the conversation, it's so important to design it in the event for redundancy and outages. But there are also ways to, not expose yourself to so much risk, in the sense that if you control yourself on a network, on a local network, maybe not tied to the whole network. Because if you lose everything, let's say in an airport or a financial institution, yeah, but you could still maintain a local network and still have operational functionality within a control room. So you can have, Christine, that redundancy in the design process. I know from not just a manufacturer perspective, but from a consultant side, I'm sure that's possible, and integration side. And lastly, there was a question that came in from Demarel, one of Michael's colleagues, about how to make it operational from the standpoint of training and staff. I mean, as consultants, you all specify these things, and then somehow when the bid hits the street, sometimes I get this all the time from I would say not the national integrators, that doesn't happen, from the regional, but the local ones. Why do I really need the pro services? I'm like, well, are you really an expert at 600 manufacturers times 3,000 products each? You tell me. Do you think you need that? Have you done this before? I mean, so I'm always very, have a ton of respect for the consultants that specify what's required. And then all too often I get someone who says, I don't need that. I've done this before. And then they break everything. I mean, we've all heard these stories. Just because the hours.
Sorry, not to interrupt. I just want to put a dig on Demerle, because technically this is his realm, right? So when we do a project, I handle all the technology stuff. He would handle this part. So I think he's just kind of, busting my chops a little bit here. But yeah, I mean, training on everything is obviously very critical, right? So, understanding the level, the different levels. We talked about roles and responsibilities. So, who should have administration level, who should be, training, and then doing the stuff reoccurring, right? Having a schedule for retraining and testing, and actually, drilling people, right? To make sure that not only did they get trained, but they also understood the content and they can actually apply it.
You want to take that another step down to the actual equipment and system side too. You want to revisit those systems on day 2, and by day 2, 3, 6, 9 months down the road, is everything still operating the same way? Everything's still, all the custom programming, is all that still functioning the same way? So it's not just the user side of it, but is the system still operating as we originally installed it? That's an important part of that as well.
Yeah, that's part of the updates and the servicing of things and maintenance contracts. That's where integrators honestly not just earn their keep, but really bring a lot of value, because we can only go as far as, consultants and manufacturers, but ultimately it's on the C3ELs of the world and the Johnson Controls of the world and many of the attendees to address that. And only because the hour is getting late and we wanted to try to keep things to people's time, value. Last final question. This is more, I guess, an open-ended question. I apologize if it's heavy, guys, but from a physical to, virtual footprints, to video sharing, AI, VR, AR, mixed reality, what key trends should we be watching? For people that are listening, people that are on this call right now, on this webinar, what should we be watching to integrate into new designs? Frank, I'll let you address that one first. Just, you're a Florida resident. I'll give you that respect. So go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, so basically we should be watching all of that: artificial intelligence, virtual reality, all of them. One thing that we should also be watching is SpaceX satellites. They're deploying 42,000 satellites out there and basically connecting everyone and bringing the capability to your anywhere in the world to be collaborating. At C3EL, we see that, and what we're doing is we're trying to, in advance, connect with other manufacturers or other vendors, and we develop a technology emergence center, it's called ETC, where Emerging Technology Center, where we collaborate and we bring customers there to understand what they're looking for and finding ways to be able to deploy their requirements in the future.
Yeah, you really addressed something important. And if I could just add to that, I think one of the things that's a popular trend, that addresses what you just spoke about also, is that a lot of manufacturers now are being bought by larger conglomerates that are not officially stateside. They're owned by a Chinese government, for example, or Chinese entities. And one of the key things I'm hearing a lot in the industry, and there's people that address this and ask questions openly about this, is that, what are we doing as a security industry to make sure that the parts are maybe TAA compliant? Maybe some of the services are people that have, real American passports and real American, paperwork to support these projects, because people are really concerned, especially in some of the DoD applications I'm seeing. Robert, I'm sure you've seen this too in your work with the U.S. Army. We, as a manufacturer, only about a year and a half ago, started developing TA compliant LED products because we realized it was a must. Our DoD clients were demanding it, not like, oh, maybe. And I'm sure you've seen this, what was it, the Hike Vision on the camera side, getting kicked out of certain environments and military sites too. Frank, you nailed it. And I think tying in all these technologies is key, and having the, I guess you could say, future ability in some of these spaces too. Mohammed, your thoughts on some of the, designs, things to look about for the future?
Yeah, so in a lot of the stuff that we've done around multinational corporations, the virtual, and there was a question about it earlier too, I think virtual is definitely something to look for in the very immediate future. Obviously last year and this year has kind of made that in the forefront. And there were already conversations around how can I regionalize my operations center. So we've helped end users kind of figure that out in terms of how to decentralize some of those operations, but that then increases the leverage on virtual operations. Video sharing is pretty critical. I think it's not so much all on future. I think it's present. Because that is, once again, how you create an efficient monitoring and response and intelligence environment when you're able to send and collaborate very quickly from within one space or within a building or virtually. AI, VR are there. I think they're a little bit still in their, not infancy, but they're still a little bit new. There's a lot of interest, but how does that really come to effect when we've looked at those solutions? How does it help my command center? At the end of the day, we want to focus on that is the question. How do I manage proactively an incident and analyze what could happen to my environment, and how can I quickly respond to an incident? And I think it's going to get there, but I think it's maybe a little bit further away than some of the other aspects. But video and virtual, I would say that is right now. And then I do see AI happening and VR happening. It's just a matter of when it happens. And AI is a very broad term. I understand that. So there's a lot of different components to it. Some of this is already happening, and some of this is more VR side. And then, you really want to pay attention to details. You want to pay attention to all of the levels of details as to what's happening in your environment in the command center, when you design it, when you operate it, when you build it, and how that comes together. So that's kind of how I see the lens on those 2-3 things.
So Mohammed, thank you so much. I think you also addressed a question that came in from one of my friends, Jason Peak from Genetech, because, it's very hard. There's clearly sometimes a gap in the design versus actual deliverables, because it's hard to hold a hand for every side of the project. Because even as a designer, you may not be involved in, the progression of the project. You may be involved in the design, but not necessarily the punch list or the exact process of hand holding everything. So I think, sometimes it's hard to ensure these deliverables unless the consultant is involved and working hand holding the integrator from start to finish. And it's not that they necessarily need hand holding. It's because being involved with the stakeholders, as we answered the first question, from the beginning to the end is hard. I mean, Michael, how many times have I engaged you the last 6 months alone for the one project? Because I was concerned the bidders necessarily weren't bidding equally on a complex system.
Yeah, for sure. It's super important. I mean, when you kind of take that delineation point when you're deploying, right, there's a lot of institutional knowledge from that, year. I mean, in this case, it's been multiple years, right? But, you have all that institutional knowledge and the wants and needs, and you have the knowledge base, and you're trying to do your best to dump that into a set of documents, right, to convey that. But, it can only go so far, right?
Yeah, you definitely addressed it. So Jim, just some final thoughts from yourself about, things to look at for the future, physical versus virtual, video sharing, AI, VR, all these new emerging technologies. What should we, be looking for in some new designs?
I think for the sake of time here, I was going to focus on one of the two things that I think both Frank and Mohammed touched on, right? Merging of video, called federation. I'm sure Jason Peak we're all familiar with that. And then there was a good question that Steve asked online as far as that the cost of real estate and the size of your control room compared to what should be on your desktop and how do you gather it and send it out. Hanan's probably best at handling, how many people and the size of a command center. I'm going to focus on, as mentioned earlier, in the digital age, as far as the gathering of the information, to me is really critical, mission critical in the digital age. Designing a security control room effectively, gathering valuable data through an efficient dashboard, I think is critical in our day-to-day activity. There are definitely applications. I know you heard it before, just mentioning, open blue technologies. It's an application that ties together, like the term that that Mohammed was touching on, federation of different video systems. Imagine doing that on multiple applications, which can bring together these applications and what you're looking for, space utilization at your fingertips through the right connectivity, along with the current applications to a single dashboard. So I think that's a key area that all these items are starting to come together. So I look forward to discussing this further, with anyone in the near future. I know we have shared our contact information, but jim.kitchen@jci.com is an easy way to get a hold of me. And that's my closing thought.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much. Michael from Sentinel, would love to hear your thoughts on some of the new designs and technologies that are emerging, and as well as your final thoughts, things to consider.
Yeah, so I mean, I think everyone's kind of touched on some things here that are all good things. The only other thing that I would kind of add, from our perspective, is we're always looking for ways to kind of streamline the event process, right? So we're looking to understand what things need to happen when an event comes in, and ways that we can kind of automate that process. So you take the human element out, because we're not really sure how the operator is going to respond in a critical situation, right? So those are the types of things we're really kind of exploring, and it kind of fits into the AI type of category, right? So the only thing that I would caution is anytime we start putting in more high tech type of things, we kind of have to have a higher level of operator, right? So it's just kind of a balance that we need to kind of create there, to make sure that we're not expecting too much of the people day to day.
Phenomenal, Michael. Thank you so much for your thoughts. And Robert, you get last licks here.
Last licks. All right. I better say something important. Everybody had great points. I'm certainly not going to reiterate all those things. Those are all, that's all the trends I think we all see. One thing that, we didn't really talk about, but is just a new reality, is having to be able to work where you are. And I think one of the things that, the pandemic and COVID, and, let's talk about Houston right now, where people can't get into work. These control rooms, these environments that we're designing are all great and wonderful, but if the people can't be there to fulfill their role, we need to also ensure that they can work wherever they are. So that goes back to the whole design and the integration of systems and making sure we're secure on the IP side, is because we have to be able to allow those people to be able to remote in and do their job when they can't physically get to that control room. We can't not provide that function with people not in that space. So that has to become a secondary consideration to all these designs, is now that we've got this wonderful room and the video wall and all this great functionality up and running, what do we do if nobody can get there? And how do we continue to provide that functionality? And that can tie back to simple remoting in, that can tie back to the AR and the VR. Am I going to do that by wearing a headset at home so I'm virtually in the control room, see what's going on? Those are all the things I think we'll start seeing become more and more prevalent, because the new normal is going to be this hybrid sense of work where people are sometimes going to be at work and sometimes they're not. We need to take that into consideration for our designs.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Robert, because I remember it started even pre-COVID. We started getting requests from customers that within the same building, different rooms, how do I take one control room and be able to connect it with another control room environments? And thank God we got that request pre-COVID, because what we realized afterwards is that we developed this need for managing multiple walls and multiple spaces within a structure. And then we realized it may happen in the near future, pre-COVID this happened, that we want to be able to integrate multiple buildings, because people can't get to work. And then we had certain security operation managers, and we said, this could be cool if we did this. And we started developing it. And I think back, what is it? Less than a year ago, my CEO is like, wait, so everyone's gonna have to be working remotely? We're like, yeah, this is crazy. And it was a good.
And to that point, I think most of the redundancy that gets built into control rooms is when, control room A goes down, I have to be able to pick it up in control room B, but that doesn't answer the question. If nobody can get to any of them, what do I do? So that redundancy has to, kind of think outside that box and outside of those lines. It's, what do I do if no one can get anywhere?
Think virtually, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. You nailed it.
This is the new thing.
Well, guys, thank you so much for being involved in the panel. Thank you, everybody that's attended, for being part of it. Just simply put, we really worked hard on this to make sure we addressed a lot of open questions and things in advance. I think we addressed every question that came in from the crowd. So thank you, all the panelists. Thank you. Thank you, all the attendees. Recording will be available afterwards. But with that said, I'm happy that everybody enjoyed their presentation. Thank you, Catherine and others, for giving the feedback. Thank you. And we certainly hope that to have, we were sold out on this one, so we fully intend to having another one in the near future to address more of these types of questions and more of these needs. But if you so desire to reach out to Michael and his group at Sentinel for specific questions, or Frank that's here, or Jim Kitchen or Robert, grab their email addresses here, hit them up on social media. Their firms obviously are more than capable of addressing real needs, and we'd love to help you. So thank you guys so much for joining the webinar, and look forward to seeing everybody, God willing, in the near future. So thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for having it.